Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another panel at this year's Unsound Bubbles Festival. Our discussion is titled Westsplaining, and our guests today are Yulia Krivich, a Ukrainian visual artist based in Poland, Tatiana Kozak, a Ukrainian journalist who has come to us from Kiev, and Jan Smoleński, a Polish political scientist. My name is Kaja Puto, and I will ask our guests a few questions, after which I will invite you to an open discussion. So I would like to start with a piece of information that has recently reached us all, I think. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2022 to one individual and two organizations. It was awarded to human rights advocate Ales Bialacki from Belarus, the Russian human rights organization Memorial, and the Ukrainian human rights organization Center for Civil Liberties. So, Tatiana, I would like to ask you, how was the Nobel Committee's decision to award the Nobel Prize to these organizations received in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, that's the recent scandal that we had. It was received not well, and unfortunately for us, because to be honest, there is a lot to be proud of, because it's a Nobel Prize, and the first time it's the human rights organization. We documented the war crimes since 2014, and famous for Sentsov campaign and prisoners in general, campaign for prisoners who are kept in Russian jails, Ukrainian prisons, I mean. And it's a lot of things to be proud of, and we woke up and just saw that we are together with Belarusian and Russian colleagues, which again, as we said, as everybody, a lot of people discussed basically, that they can be awarded as well, because they
deserve it?
Yeah, they deserve it, absolutely. I mean, Memorial is also what they do in Russia is very precious and important, as well as Belarusian activists. However, this wording that Nobel Prize Committee gave, that's about the peace, about the again joining us together as a brotherly nation. So it seems very outdated and seems very inappropriate in the situation which is going on right now, and that's why it was accepted very it was contradictory to us. Something. On one hand we are proud of, on the other hand we are feeling like not really comfortable with at all. And there were calls on to the Human Rights Center to call off the prize, to cancel the prize, and to because of that. But there were other people protecting them. So I mean, it couldn't have been that difficult, if the Nobel Prize thought a little bit more, but
So, if I understand it correctly, the problem is not the prize for Russians or Belarusians itself, but the problem is the context, right? In the war where Russia thinks that Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus are one unity, and Ukraine is trying to emancipate from this scheme. This context is a problem, not the...
Yeah, absolutely. You got it right. And as Matvichuk, Alexandra, she's the head of the Center of Civil Rights, she tried to change the context. She's saying that these are the prize for organizations who are fighting not for the peace, for the human rights, and against the dictatorship. Well, it applies to everybody. Everybody. But on the other hand, they are the countries that are. They belong to countries that are attacking, Ukraine, and we are in leading the war against their dictators, basically. And there will be an interesting moment. Everybody was talking as well about where the money will go to. I mean, whether Russia and Belarus will donate the money to Ukraine or not. So
Yulia, what do you think? What's your opinion?
Oh yeah, it's my favorite topic recently. You know, it was the first news which I read in this morning. In that morning, it was Friday last week. So my first thought was like, what a cringe! Like, and I even use this word, and I wrote it in my Instagram. That what a cringe! They put us again in one plate, in one bench, like Slavic trio, which supposed to be together, supposed to be like, you know, together forever. Or for me also it was like a statement, some kind of, come on guys, be a friends, you know, again, shake your hands. So yeah, but the first thing that appeared in my head was my last experience where I basically was put it in the same situation in a Documenta 15. I think because there are people from Dnipro who are also, we've been together there. So maybe I explain some context of Documenta 15. I mean, you probably know there are a lot of like controversies and scandals related to this year's edition, and one thing for us, for Ukrainians, was very important thing that there, in documentaries there was no any mention of Ukraine and invasion on Ukraine and war in Europe, and also there is no any artists from Ukraine were presented in the main program of Documenta. I mean, I fully understand there is a big construction, they programming and planning the whole project like years before, and here we can also like talk about how this kind of institutions and organizations are flexible in these consequences. I mean, in this context of very frequent, I mean, in the war, right? They like couldn't react in time. So okay, but the main point here, the main thing which I wanted to explain here, so we were invited to take part in a public program. So public program of Documenta was very huge. Basically, there are a lot of like events happening every day in different locations. So we've been one of this kind of events for 3 days. So one of the collective, which is based in Berlin, decided to invite Ukrainian participants. So there were 4 organizations from 4 big cities, which is occupied, damaged, bombed in that time and this time right now. So there are organizations from Kherson, which is occupied right now, organization from Kharkiv, which was bombed in that very moment in July, from Mariupol to Mariupol. You know what happened with Mariupol. There is no Mariupol right now. There is no city. There is no people there, basically. And Dnipro, Kultura Medialna, which invited me. So we came to Kassel, and in the moment we got to know that organizers also invited Russian organizations, and they supposed to be after us in the same space. I mean, also it's the same. I didn't have any like. I would say that I didn't know these people from Russia, so I didn't know this organization, but I can imagine that they're like against war and the anti-Putin regime and so on and so on. But organizers decided to invite them, even they didn't ask us before. They didn't even inform us before, you know? Like, I always said about this, like, at least some empathic level of the situation, where you invited someone from really like city which is like destroyed. They all have a trauma, like very fresh trauma right now, and you put again together us. So yeah, it was really weird, and the most weirdest thing was they didn't inform us. Like we got to know that Russian will be there from our friends. You know, and when we asked what's going on, guys, like why you didn't inform us, they were like, we planning this project before the invasion, And suddenly I understood, okay, they planned it like, Russian, Ukrainians, Belarusian, again together. Program of 3 countries, So about Nobel Prize, again, I absolutely agree with Tatiana's. I mean, with my due respect to Alice Bilecki and organization Vesna, Alice right now in prison, he's a political prisoner, and also Memorial, they did a huge work in Belarus and in Russia, but putting us together again in the context of invasion in Ukraine is a gesture. It's some kind of gesture. And here we also can criticize the whole Nobel Prize. We didn't know who awarded it before and how cringe and weird and awkward situation were before. I mean, with awarded European Union or Barack Obama. But last year, as I got to know, last year, Nobel Peace Prize was awarded also to Russian activist, writer, editor of Novaya Gazeta, right? So, and from my Belarusian friends, I get to know that Alice Bilecki actually was nominated last year, but he didn't get it. He didn't get the award. In the moment when Belarus really needed support from European Union, in the middle of their protest, of their fighting.
2 years ago. Yeah.
2 years ago, yeah. They decided to award it again Russian, and the same year, year after, again, Memorial. I mean, also, I respect this organization and really appreciate their work, but come on.
I just want to add that last year's money were the Muratov, the head of the Novaya Gazeta, editor-in-chief, he donated it to refugees, but refugees in Russia. I mean, the Ukrainians going to Russia, whereas we know that a lot of people are being just forcefully taken to Russia, and it's another problem there. And it was scandal as well. I mean, everybody in Ukraine hated it and didn't understand it. And
Can I add one thing that in this situation, again, I understood, because I want to explain why I'm here, sitting here in the t-shirt, which, with this sentence, decolonize Russia. So basically this situation is mostly here we again see that the knowledge about Russia and about Ukraine should be and about Eastern Europe should be decolonized, not just Russia, decolonize Russia. Decolonize Russia, actually, we're appealing to the whole world, and then Westerns, decolonize your knowledge of the region.
Yeah, so maybe now it's good time to explain what the title of our debate is about. Janek, in the beginning of the full-scale war in Ukraine, you wrote an article on the term Westsplaining. So could you please explain us what does it mean, who coined this term, and how do you understand it today?
Hello. So I first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and I feel very honored to be here. The article that we wrote, my friend Jan Krivich and I, was an expression of anger. I mean, I'm not denying that. We were the term Westsplaining was the first usage that I know was in Balkan Insight, when the editor of the Balkan Insight wrote about Western tourists who were coming to the Balkans, and after reading a book about the Balkans, or usually just a history section of the Lonely Planet Guide, start explaining complexities of the region to the locals, right? And if this resembles in one way or the other mansplaining, it is because it does resemble mansplaining, right? So let me tell you what mansplaining is, right? I mean, you have condescending attitude, you have presumption of knowledge, you have overconfidence, and you have ignorance, right? So this was the first context that I know of, right? When we use this term, we meant something similar, but we wanted to refer it to more question of the production of knowledge, right? To put it very in a very like confusing terms. In other words, like who should be talking, or in what way we should be talking about the region of Eastern Europe, and in what way people should be talking about that, right? And to put it to make it very, very clear, it is not an identitarian term, right? It's not about only Eastern Europeans should be talking about Eastern Europe, right? It's not about that. It's about the particular optic that you assume, right? A particular gaze, right? And Westsplainers that we had problems with, and they were like across the political spectrum, right? From the right to the center to the left. I mean, they reproduced basically colonial metrics of looking and explaining the world, right? So you did have assumption that only large and powerful countries have anything to say, right? Basically, the whole NATO story, right? That it's only NATO that is at fault, and that Russia and the US should sit at the table to solve the Ukraine conflict, how is it presented, right? Or the proxy war, right? An assumption that because that we meaning the Westerners, right, have some great analytical schemata that can explain what is going on, and thanks to that, we also can prescribe certain actions, right? And this in particular refers to the idea of Ukraine should be neutral, without explaining what neutrality in this particular context means, right? Some vague references to Finland are made, some vague references to Austria are made, right? Historical examples of neutral states. But yeah, it's again, right, it's overconfidence, it's lack of knowledge, and omission of certain facts on the ground. And on top of that, there is a denial of agency of Eastern Europeans. I'm sorry for using the blanket term of Eastern Europeans, but it applies to the Baltics, the Poland, and other countries that decided to join NATO, not NATO expanded into their territory. It also applies to Ukraine, right? Which I don't really think that wants to remain in the Russian sphere of influence or want to be in the Russian sphere of influence. So, yeah.
It doesn't.
No, I mean, I'm being facetious right now, right? So yeah, and those things are not taken into account because this is not like colonized peoples were not taken into colonized people's interests, colonized people's aspirations were not taken into account when Europeans went to, say, scramble for Africa, right? I mean, obviously there is a limit to this analogy, but I wanted to emphasize that there are certain like schemata, analytical schemata, and a certain approach, right, that really does reproduce a colonial way of thinking, an imperial way of thinking.
And do you think that the Nobel scandal is an example of Westsplaining? How do you understand?
I am not very comfortable speaking about that because I don't it's putting I think it's like putting everyone in a very difficult situation, right? Because on the one hand, you cannot deny that both Belarusian and Russian recipients of the Nobel Prize, they do amazing job, right? On the other hand, trying to pair them, like put them together with the Ukrainian recipients of the Nobel Prize, it looks like parent going to children quarreling. It's like, okay, guys, now you should shake hands and say collectively, I'm sorry, right? And I think that's more lack of sensitivity, right? Again, right? Yes, I understand that this whole documenta was planned in advance, but at least let someone know, right? We remember the scandal of the Solidarity concert organized by the German president, right? When suddenly Russian soloists were supposed to take part, right? Ukrainian artists, as far as I know, were also invited, but they were the main thing there were Russians. And again, right, their artistic skills are not in question here. What is in question here, or what is questioned here, is the what motivates you, right? And also the assumption that Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians are kind of the same because this is, I don't know, Eastern Slavs, right? Culture is similar. What it means, I don't really know, right? Yeah, so I think that there is definitely a kind of arrogance of basically, oh no, we know that they are together, right? The arrogance and lack of sensitivity, which are definitely a part of Westsplaining.
And Julia, have you ever been Westsplained?
I think very often. I mean, even not in the last months, but in whole my life. Like it also referred, I think, to this topic of putting us together. It's for me my favorite description of Ukrainians or Belarusians abroad. It's like Russian-speaking group. Do you know that? Like Russian-speaking group. Like it's very often using for us. Like, and because obviously, yes, I mean, I agree. We all speaking Russian. It's our history. It's our colonized history. That's why part of Ukraine is speaking Russian right now. I'm personally come from Eastern Ukraine, so my first language is Eastern Ukrainian, Russian language. So, but using this kind of word, Russian-speaking group, it's also very imperial. It's also very like, again, we are referring to Russia. And also one thing which I wanted to add here about also this construction of Eastern Slavic trio is also about, you know, that Russian propaganda uses very often. Like it's usually it was a justification of Russian invasion on Ukraine 2014. It is justification of Russian invasion this year. This term, I think, this propaganda, this narrative was started to use something, I think, 17th, 18th century. So like one Russian nation, Russian, Ukrainian, Belarusian, whereas Ukrainian is little Russians. So I wanted to like say these things about Russian-speaking group, but one of the recent experience of Westsplaining, which is like, it happened in Poland. This is weird. I mean, I used to work in Academy of Fine Arts as an assistant and in Szczecin, where I don't work anymore. And one of the reasons it was like that I'm the political engaged, I'm an activist, so my activity was like very, right now, very visible. So for academy, or I don't know for whom there, it was uncomfortable situation. But one of the things that I heard that I'm Ukrainian, I'm engaged in conflict, I can't be objective. And also it reminds me one thing that people usually in Western countries usually saying about Ukrainians right now, oh, they are in so sensitive state, they are in emotional state, they can't be objective, you know. We are like people abroad, people who are not engaged in this conflict. Don't use word conflict, please. They can't be like objectively see the whole situation and the global price for this war and blah, blah, blah. So, yes, I was Westsplaining often.
I mean,
Tatiana?
I just wanted to, if I may interrupt, the thing of being objective is very much related to who is rational in this whole, like we need to rationally analyze the whole story. And again, this is something that we very well known from the history of ideas since 17th century of imperial conquest by Europeans, so of non-European lands. So this is, yeah.
Tanya?
Westsplaining. Well,
Westsplaining.
there is a lot of Westsplaining in journalist job, from Western journalists basically who used to cover Ukraine from Moscow. And usually, like if you see the before the war, if you see the article about what's going on in Ukraine, it will be like journalists sitting in Moscow and writing about it. And I remember in 2015, I guess, when the heavy fighting already a little bit ceased, and there was this Minsk agreement in place. A lot of foreign journalists who were covering war on the ground, they just left for Moscow because they said, well, it's things going on there, and the fate of Ukraine probably will be decided there, which is we prove it wrong right now. And like a little bit of like one or two foreign journalists stayed, and no foreign offices. There were no foreign offices in Ukraine, and basically that's how they all fall into this brotherly nation myth, I would say, and they were reporting about Ukraine since then. About there was a coup in 2013 and 14, and there were some vicious nationalists who tried to seize the power, and I mean, they didn't fall that much into this Russian propagandist myth, but they still like kind of believed in it, because you could now and then see how they wrote about Crimea being Russian, kind of okay, it's okay for them, or there were like separatists in Ukraine, or there were Russian communities being oppressed by awful Ukrainian nationalists. By the way, to be honest, before 2014, I didn't go much to Donbas area, and so since then I've reported a lot, and there were a lot of Ukrainian-speaking people in Donbas, in Donetsk region and Lugansk region, because Donbas actually it's also a kind of Russian formation, I would say, Russian word. So when I was heading at, and basically. It's all right now. The situation is better, and we have foreign offices of foreign journalists in Ukraine, and it's changed.
They moved from Moscow to Ukraine.
Yeah, well, first of all, some of them were kicked out from Moscow, and then they decided it's better to cover from here, which is, I believe, it's important because you have to, understand what's going on in the region, and the history and the what we think of it, because sometimes like with this Nobel Prize thing, you are living in your country, you're reporting, you kind of living your life, and suddenly something like that comes out, and you realize that your idea of Ukraine and the idea of your life in Ukraine and the idea of the West about Ukraine differs somehow, and it's really strange. As for professional, and I remember in 2013 there was a situation when we went on a journalistic kind of professional tour we were invited to US, and that was such a strange experience. We were treated as people from the post-Soviet society, even further away, and their organizers didn't want to let us, go around the town like freely, because they thought we would want to stay, want to run away. Seriously, I mean, and then in 2013 it was December, and we had already, Maidan revolution going on, and there was 2004 before, and Orange Revolution, and then since then we've been regularly protesting. against, anti-democratic moves by our government, and protesting for better, it was mass protests as well before 2013, of course. And I mean, that was so funny. I would never forget about it. How to feel like post-Soviet person. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, and actually now we are having this pleasant conversation here in autumn Krakow, and just 300 kilometers from here, just 5 days ago, bombs were falling on the city of Lviv. And Poland is also affected, obviously, to a smaller extent. Krakow and other big cities in Poland are hosting more than 1 million refugees in Ukraine. So I guess our audience would like to have a bigger picture of how we feel here. And I would like to ask you a personal question. So how the war affected your life? And maybe we'll start with Tanya.
I mean, yes, it's affected everyone completely. I don't know where to start, to be honest. Well, from the start, basically, it was first of all, nobody knew that the war would be coming. I mean, we knew, but we didn't. This invasion, as well as the West, actually didn't. European Union, at least, because I heard this recent speech read by Joseph Borrell, the head of EU diplomacy. Basically, he confessed that nobody believed in the EU government or top officials that it would be coming. So yes, I mean, first things I had to deal with the security, personal security, because Kyiv was under attack, and basically were thinking, what should we do? And our media was thinking whether we should evacuate to some safer place or stay in Kyiv. Of course, I didn't want to go to outside, but because I'm a journalist and I report. Since 2014, I'm reporting on the war. So for me, it's kind of normal. But when the war comes to your house, it's a bit different, and you have to deal with many questions like personal questions. Where you're gonna live, because my colleagues, for example, they didn't stay in their houses. They moved to another areas in Kyiv, so to feel safer, or where there is a bomb shelter, where it's easier to hide from the shells and everything. Or my colleagues were staying in the Kyiv region, which was occupied, and actually one of them died. Another one was taken as a prisoner of war, and he's still in prison in Russia. Many colleagues just gave up journalism and went to war, joined the army. So they just and today actually it's the day that we celebrate people who army people who protect Ukraine during this war. It's kind of celebration, big celebration today. It's like Independence Day, and today it's going to be one of the. These are big celebrations. So yeah, I mean, it's like all mixed together, and you're reporting and kind of you're reporting from your personal perspective, and you're trying to be objective, but you realize that. You have to think what objectivity is. You have to, you realize straight away that you won't be able to, distance yourself from and think of good Russian people who are, kind of, they exist and they help. Could you probably help Ukrainian people? But no. You realize that you're on one side of the conflict, but again, it doesn't interfere with your with your ability to criticize the steps of the government they take, for example, in the war, and also, by the way, there is a slight. There are restrictions, of course, when there and slight censorship because of that, and it influenced the job as well. And you, for example, cannot report from the front line. You are banned for when the Kharkiv region was liberated. Before that, 1 week before, no journalist was allowed in the area, on the front line. And then this news came up about the Kharkiv region. I was like, wow. Yeah, and we were sitting and finding out information from TikToks and Twitters. So it was difficult. So it's a new challenge basically for us as well, for as journalists, to report on the war in these conditions. And if there is a hit by a rocket missile, you cannot report about it straight away from the point. You have to wait for a couple of hours, and you have to wait for official information about that, and you cannot show the positions because as the army explained and the Ministry of Defense explained, you have to. The rockets can be corrected if you see the picture, which I doubt so. I mean, with the the Sputnik information and all the Google and everything that we have. Well, basically, there are a lot of changes in our daily routine, how we work, in my life, basically how I live. When I was going on a train to here was Ukrainian, mostly women, basically. One of them said, only when we cross the border, only in Poland I can feel safe and quiet, and it's quiet here, and I can relax. It is true, basically, because you have sirens, air raid sirens going on all the time, and you kind of know that it's not gonna. You cannot believe that it's not gonna hit your house, but on the other hand, you think maybe it can happen. So it's just all tension all the time, but you get used to it somehow.
Thank you, Yulia.
I will be short saying because this is I listened to Tatiana and thought about that. I'm also a person who didn't experience by myself on my own skin, for example, the air raid range and live life just on application in my telephone, my phone, or because I live here for 11 years, but at the same time, my friends, my family, all my family right now in Dnipro, so just the one thing is changed that I contacting them very often right now, every day, and I started the day with the news, of course, and you started to monitoring the global news, to understanding and to analyzing what's going on also in Ukraine and how it influenced the situation in Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. One thing that I wanted to say, actually, how it affected my life, it affected my sense and my feeling of security. And not just security in my personal life, but global security. Suddenly you understand that you are you started to be aware, so much aware to the global crisis, global disasters, which is going on right now everywhere, wars, conflicts, global climate crisis, Iran, pandemia, the whole region, and you start to understand what's going on in your country, and this war is also the part of the much bigger problem, a much bigger problem,
end of the world.
Yeah. And suddenly, also I finished with that I also feel so much mature right now. I mean, in a sense that I'm getting older, really older right now. When I speak with my Polish friends or my friends from abroad, I understood that, suddenly world is changed for me, and it's like putting off your pink glasses, something like that.
Jan?
I mean, I don't know what to add. I mean, it didn't affect me personally, but I mean, an anecdote. I am involved in the Invisible University for Ukraine, which is a consortium of Ukrainian universities, Central European University, and some other EU-based institutions. And I'm supposed to be one of the mentors, right? And I had a call, Zoom call with one of my co-mentors, and it was right after Russia resumed the indiscriminate shelling of Ukraine, and well, the standard phrase like, "Yeah, Anton, stay safe." And he said, "Well, yeah, right now we have air raid, so probably I should go to the shelter." Right. So one of this was one of the things that I realized that. Pretty much everyone that I know who lives in Ukraine, and it's not that many people, but I have people I know in Ukraine. All of their lives are in danger. And the other thing is the helplessness, right? I mean, one of the things that, I don't know, maybe it's your experience as well, but I mean, I go over my head constantly over and over arguments with people who say, I don't know, do not supply arms to Ukraine because this is just pouring gasoline over the fire, which is not, right? Unless Ukraine has enough weapons to repel Russian conflict, Russian invasion, this war will continue, right? This war will continue, right? So this war can end only with Russian defeat. I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's feeling of helplessness in my case, right? My family, my extended family, we, as probably many families in Poland, we were trying to help as much as we could. My immediate family, we did not as much because in October we already took in a family of Afghani refugees, so we couldn't provide shelter for Ukrainian refugees, but we tried in some other way. But again, it felt extremely inadequate, right? So, and at the same time, you feel that it's happening right next to you, right? And the fact that it is historically an empire that used to oppress both Ukraine and Poland, right? It feels like it's something like, yeah, that it's something very, very close, right? At the same time, it's very distant because we are very safe here, right? I mean,
yeah, we are safe, but I was wondering, do you think that Polish society is afraid of war? That something like really moved Polish society after the 24th February?
I mean, definitely something did happen because with all the imperfections and stories that we hear of anti-Ukrainian incidents, there is a outpour of solidarity towards Ukrainians. So I think that this is something that that did change, right? I mean, correct me if this is not your experience, right? I don't really think that Poles are afraid of the war, mostly because of NATO, right? And we can criticize NATO for many reasons, right? But it is not a NATO member country that was invaded, right? It was non-NATO country that was invaded, and NATO was not the reason, right? Because you cannot join NATO if you have an active border conflict, basically, right? And there was an active border conflict, a border dispute, how they put it in a very nice diplomatic language, right? So, and before 2014, Ukraine couldn't join because not all the member states of NATO wanted to accept Ukraine, right? So the entire story that NATO is at fault as
NATO was in Ukraine at least, and around was demonized, like some awful, vicious.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the Pew Research Center study, the support for joining NATO raised above 50% in Ukraine only after 2014, right? So, and before that, it was very ambivalent. And
because politicians were playing on that, and politicians leaning towards Russia and towards, this great post-Soviet, one brother nation thing. So,
Girls, would you like to comment on what Jan said, maybe Yulia, about the Polish heart to Ukrainians?
Oh, actually, I know. This is kind of weird thing because from one side, I really feel this solidarity, and this is so much true, solidarity. I mean, in the sense that, for example, one of my friends told me a couple of months ago that, you know what, I feel something which is like not mine right now. I feel like intergenerational trauma, which I think is trauma of my grandparents. And suddenly when war started, Russian invasion started in Ukraine in February, I suddenly understood like how much I scared. And this is so much true. This is true story, and I think a lot of Polish people are in solidarity with Ukraine because we have.
You're a buffer zone.
Yeah, we also have a similar experience in a history, and we all the region itself. I mean, Eastern Europe is always every country of Eastern Europe aware of Russian imperialism, right? So that's why I think this solidarity is true. But at the same time, I had such a feeling that I remember when Polish President Duda said that we are friends. There is no any conflicts which we had before. There is no present right now. We have a new brand friends future with Ukraine. I suddenly understood that this emotional speech on one side, but the same time you can't say that everything which is going on before the war is suddenly disappeared in this very moment. No, and I'm as an immigrant in Poland for a long time, and also I work with this team in my practice. And
could you tell more about it?
Yeah, in 2019 I made this action happening in the front of a Western railway station in Warsaw. This is a place where economic migrants and migrants from Ukraine usually come, and I went there with a flag, and there is a written on the flag. There is a written in Ukraine. I mean, w Ukrainie. It's something to translate it directly in English. I would start with this. Do you know that sometimes in English you can say there is a construction of the Ukraine. It's absolutely related to this. It's the same in on Ukraine, now Ukraine in Polish. And this is also tradition, linguists saying that this is language tradition, but its tradition appears when Ukraine there is no Ukraine on a map of Europe. So Ukraine was a part of some regions of Poland or Russian.
Yeah, it's worth to mention. Maybe not all of you know that now Poland is an ally of Ukraine, but Poland and Ukraine also have a colonial past.
Yeah.
Poland being a colonizer and actively fighting Ukrainian independence fighters before the Second World War. So, yeah.
Yeah, and in the perspective of today, I think that Poland has a really unique lens on this situation, because this is a country which was colonizer, but also which was colonized, and it's a very interesting place to understand the the situation which is going on right now in Eastern Europe. So coming back to my happening, yes, so I made this flag in Ukraine, в Ukrainie, standing in front of the railway station and make a picture, and then this picture was published in one of the most popular liberal newspaper in Poland, Wyborcza. And suddenly it's opening the discussion, which was my aim, opening this discussion, how we treated Ukrainians in Poland, because even before the war, before the invasion, before the February, there were 1.5 million officially Ukrainians living and working in Poland. So adding this 2 maybe millions who come right now, it's we will have a 10% of Polish population. So so this happening was before, and it opened the discussion either colonialism, did this relationship a colonial relationship in the history of Polish and Ukrainian.
And also now, with migrants working below their qualifications in jobs that were left by Polish people emigrating to the UK and Germany. Yeah?
If I may add.
Please, yes.
Are you done? Or,
I'm done.
Okay. No. So I didn't want to interrupt. So I just one correction to what I said. Right. This output of solidarity is so impressive, also because of the history of conflict, Polish-Ukrainian history that is not the easiest history, right? And because before the war, the anti-Ukrainian sentiments, treating Ukrainian as people who are supposed to do the menial jobs that no one else wants to, right, was something very prevalent, right? So one of the things that is surprising is that we were able to at least partially overcome it in the heat of the moment, right? Because I also think that this is a heat of the moment. And I also think that one of the biggest issues that Poles need to face when they are talking about Ukrainian resistance to Russian invasion, right, is to what extent this is the war that they want to, to what extent we want to solve our issues with historical issues with Russia, right, through that, right? And I am trying to constantly ask this question myself, right? Therefore, I have no desire whatsoever to give any prescriptions, right? But this is a question that we need to be asking, right? To what extent we are actually cheering for Ukrainians because we are cheering for the oppressed, or to what extent we just want Russians to get their asses kicked, for pardon my French, right? But this is...
We do.
We also...
But yeah, I mean, this is one of the things, and I think that the Polish solidarity at this moment, it's a product of a very unique situation. But I hope that it will, I noticed among my friends that your happening did actually change a lot.
Absolutely.
Journalists and even copywriters, right, started writing in Ukraine, w Ukrainie, not in the Ukraine or na Ukrainie, right? So, which is the linguistic change is also. I think that it's an expression of the mental change, and we have to still reconcile ourselves with the history of Polish colonialism in Ukraine, right? But I think that this...
Yeah, so Yulia started it, and then Ukrainians kicked Russian ass, and it worked in the end.
As for the support, for example, in Ukraine, it's absolutely felt like they understand how much Poland supports Ukraine, and it's very precious, and everybody I mean, I worked with Polish colleagues on the front line and like in the remote villages, and they were like, because they were like, oh, you're from Poland. Oh, I mean, they were telling colleagues, and they were saying thank you to them because some their relatives, some their friends, they were going to Poland and staying there, saving their lives basically. And it's everybody feels gratitude 100%. And as for this security reason, issue, you said that you don't know that Polish do not feel scared and everything, but you do not feel scared. But what you do, right? You are buying a lot of weapons right now. I mean, it's a good thing to do as well in terms of the Russia
and
being
checking bomb shelters that were already turned into
yeah, I mean, it's important, right?
Okay, before we open discussion, I would like to ask a last question to Tanya. I guess that it's a difficult question, but let's try. So when the war is over, and I hope that Ukraine will win it, the old problems will come back. I mean, corruption and domination of the economy of oligarchs, or maybe the opposite. Maybe the war can be a window of opportunity to, serious reforms.
I am optimistic about the future. When the war ends, it will definitely give a push to the country to become more democratic, more corruption-free. And it's not because I just believe in that. I see it every time we had kind of revolution. Right now it's also we have this kind of anti-imperial revolution, I would say. Like from 2014 when we said we want to go to EU, and we definitely don't want to join Russia, and we also meant that we don't want to be a dictatorship. We don't want to be a corrupt country. We want to be democratic and fair state to everybody. And in 2004 as well, it was also strive for independence and for the more democratic, in favor of democratic forces. So since 2014, I've seen such a great leap forward for Ukraine in this kind of sphere, because we have a lot of created anti-corruption bodies that follow. We started anti-corruption court. There are a lot of civil rights, not civil rights, NGOs that are following the oligarchs. Journalists are reporting on them, and So I think. Now, and actually those people from 2014 who joined the civil society, they also went to war. Unfortunately, we lost some of them, but there are still many more of us, and we understand that we are fighting for the better future, not to be like, not to be like authoritarian dictatorship Russia. And it's absolutely clear to everyone. And we want to have the army according to the NATO standards, and our chief of the army saying that we are trying already to apply that now. So I'm optimistic about it. It won't be easy, and of course, the old political elites that are still here, they will be trying to fight back and and live the lives they used to live. But little by little, with the help of Europe as well, European Union, which is also important. Their not their investments as well, but the way they look after their investments, because when they give you the money, they also give some conditions for that. They say that you have to reform this sphere or that sphere. You have to tell where you put the money to. So this is all little things that are very important, and I'm sure that we will get better when we're finished.
Let's hope that we will
with the war.
Meet,
we'll finish with the war.
meet next year, and we will discuss economic colonialism of Western Europe in Ukraine, and this will be our biggest problem.
what's better, Russian colony or Western?
Okay, guys, do you have any questions, comments? Yeah?
It's not really a question, but I just wanted to refer to you, Kaja Puto, because you asked how war affected the lives of the speakers, and I'm personally from Ukraine, and we are talking about empathy here, and you're asking this question, which puts us in a situation to go through these horrible events again, so we have to tell how terrible everything was, because it was of course terrible, and to share it with everyone. So we are kind of experiencing this every day from everyone randomly, and I'm admiring how the speakers told it in a very calm and detailed way. But it's just would be nice to reciprocate on this topic to, like, what is the motivation of this again, and for what are you asking it, to make a storytelling, to, of course it's important to share these stories because it's a direct source, but in my opinion it's a highly unempathic question to do it like this. That's it.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I thought about it, and actually I asked my panelists before the panel if they want to answer this question, and I decided, when they agreed, I decided to do it because I think we have a very international audience here, and I guess for people in outside Eastern Europe, and by Eastern Europe I mean also Poland, it's quite hard to understand how do we feel here, or how it's really going on here. But I didn't think that I could offend somebody in the audience, so I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you for this comment. I just wanted to add that we face this, as journalists, face this thing as every day, because we, in our professional lives, because we go to the front lines and talk to people and ask them to tell their stories. And every time I think whether, I should go into this detail with them or not. And it's because, of course, they've, and there's many journalists working on the site, and like sometimes I just, this recent example, the guy from Kharkiv region, he was in prison and he had to tell the stories, I think, dozens of times about his imprisonment, not imprisonment, but being a prisoner of war. But on the other hand, he told me that he's okay with it because he feels better after telling that, and he's kind of processing it for himself. But he's a psychologist, so maybe... Yeah, but so it's like, you never know. When you feel that people do not feel like talking about it, you don't really push there, and you feel just sensitive and leave them alone, and that's it. Yeah, but you're right, this is a very sensitive question for everybody.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi. I have a question about whataboutism. I don't know how to pronounce this word, and its relation to Westsplaining. Because I'm also Ukrainian and I live in Berlin, and there's a lot of Westsplaining in my daily routine. And when the refugee crisis happened, I mean refugees from Ukraine, there was a lot of, but what about this country, and refugees from the other places. And I understand where it comes from, Syrian friends or Afghani friends, but when it comes from someone from the West, I just see how people are faced with their racism, and they don't know how to react how to go around this. So my question is, if you thought about whataboutism, I don't know how to say it, and how it's a part of this Westsplaining, and how to react to this, if you maybe researched that or wrote about this already.
I mean, yes, whataboutism is a extremely annoying problem, because whenever you speak about or advocate for solidarity with Ukraine, you are faced with the question, what about Yemen, what about Syria, what about Iraq, what about Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. And or what about Palestine, right? Which is extremely fashionable reference in the left, on the left, and I identify it as a left-wing person, right? And I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer to it. Maybe you two have, but one, like, yeah, we should solidarize with pretty much everyone who is oppressed, right? At the same time, it is impossible for me to not to take this particular war very personally, because it triggers things that I never thought it would trigger in me, right? Suddenly I stopped insisting that I am Central European. I accepted, or I embraced fully and with joy the label Eastern European, right? And Eastern European meaning that probably those from the West will have difficulties understanding. Yeah, how to react to that? Sometimes I just feel that the middle finger is the best option. In some other situations, if you feel that the person is empathetic and wants to actually engage in a productive conversation, you can say what the similarities are, right, of their situation, right, with other oppressed nations, right? And but yeah, I mean, I am very short-tempered, so I tend to go for the middle finger usually. It's not.
Probably when you don't want to do anything, you just say, "What about?" You know, you don't really want to help, and you just cover that with this "what about" discussion. You know, but this is something that Putin really loves when he talks about West. He says, like, well, yeah, you say we're corrupt, but what about West? It's also corrupt. So I mean, I've heard mostly about this whataboutism concerning Putin.
But yeah, I mean, so
the problem is that sometimes it's right, and it's even more dangerous then.
I mean, but the thing is that when you look at the Russian or Kremlin propaganda, right? The Kremlin propaganda does not care much about painting a nice picture of Russia, right? It's like, you can believe that, you can even say that Russia is corrupt, as long as you say that the West is corrupt as well, right? As evil, and the West is evil as well, right? And yeah, that's true. That sometimes there is a problem, right? Like, look at Yemen, right? The situation there is horrible, right? And obviously, we should be that there should be more in the media about that. At the same time, I cannot deny that war in Ukraine, Russian invasion against Ukraine, like, triggers things that are completely like that war in Yemen did not trigger in me, or even in Iraq, which was my political initiation. Protests against the war in Iraq were my political initiation. So. Yeah.
Yeah, but probably it's the issue, a question of the security of Europe, basically, the war in Ukraine, because it's the borders, and you know, we are.
Yeah, but all the conflicts. Sorry for using the word conflict in this context, but all wars in the world are somehow connected to the European security when you think about migrants, right?
And basically, they can be weaponized as well, as we can see.
Of course.
Like Belarus, what they did to the migrant. It's recently, like, just before the invasion, Russian invasion. It's the weaponization of the migrants. Yeah, but you're right. I think you have to not to just say what about, but you just have to look deep into the details of the war or into the details of the situation, and that's it.
Any more questions, comments?
Hello. Just want to pick up on a point you made earlier about conditional aid. I'm from the UK, and my country's been quite active in support of Ukraine. So we've donated a lot of missiles. The reason that Russia has not achieved air superiority. 6,000 troops have just arrived back in Ukraine after being trained by the British military. And we almost certainly have special forces on the ground helping locate targets and coordinate strategy there. So my question is, where do you draw the line between this Westsplaining idea and the West providing support and advice that could help Ukraine win this war?
Yes. Absolutely, yes. Providing arms and helping in any ways. Absolutely helping Ukraine, and also you helping yourself and your security in Europe. But I just wanted to say this, like recently I read this article about Westsplaining, and it was about that they explaining Westsplaining. And one thing is, I think, is really important here, that it's not about your original, I mean, not about your nationality, not about where you live. I mean, Westsplaining is about Eurocentric point of view, and like I have a lot of friends from different countries who totally understand the situation, or even helping, and like I say that there are Ukrainians already in a way how they perceive this situation, but it never depends on where you're from. Yeah.
If I may I ask a question back, like your because I think you asked about the line between Westsplaining and providing aid, right? So that Western countries are like treat the war in Ukraine as kind of a way of trying to achieve their own goals. This is what you're trying to get at, because
Maybe I didn't understand the question.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. So more the kind of the military advice and strategy helping to win the war that the West are providing.
I'm not a military strategist, so I cannot tell you, right? Maybe I mean, my gut feeling is, as long as it is welcomed by Ukrainians, it is the right thing to do, right? Yeah, so this would be my only answer to that question, mostly because I do not know much about military strategy, and I don't want to,
It's okay to say, I don't know. But it's a good answer, actually. Now, as for the Britain, of course, we know about the help, and we are really, again, grateful for that. And we know that Boris Johnson was the first politician to come to Ukraine after the invasion, like top politician. I know that all the controversy about that, about his persona and everything, but he was favorite British politician in Ukraine somehow because of that. I know, and again, it's just another thing, you know. You have your own national idea about him, and we have our own idea. And yes, I believe that being together with Ukraine in this war, supporting it's the line, and understanding and it's not just a simple formula because we're with Ukraine, that's why we're good. It's understanding the deep roots of this conflict and where it's going to, and why it's important for Europe to be on the Ukraine side for that. And that's how we can differ from Westsplaining to the aid from the Westsplaining.
Okay, I think we are running out of time, so thank you very much. I hope that courage of Ukrainians can become an example for many nations, communities, social groups fighting for their own emancipation. Thank you for your questions, and first of all, thank you for our guests, Tatiana Kozak, Yulia Krivich, and Jan Smoleński.